Welcome, and thank you for joining me tonight. Whether you're settling into bed after a long day, taking a quiet break, or simply looking for some peaceful company, I'm glad you're here. Tonight, we're going on a gentle journey through time to explore something we all share: the challenge of getting a good night's sleep. Have you ever wondered what kept people awake centuries ago, before the glow of phone screens and the hum of air conditioners? Tonight we'll discover the surprisingly familiar worries that plagued our ancestors, from ancient Egyptian farmers fretting about flood seasons to medieval bakers rising before dawn. We'll meet ordinary people from different eras and learn how their nighttime concerns weren't so different from our own. Along the way, we'll explore the soothing rhythms of daily life, the sounds of nature that filled their evenings, and the simple comforts that helped them find rest. Comment what time you're watching this and where from, if you'd like. It's fun to know. Let's begin our story in ancient Egypt, along the banks of the mighty Nile River, where the gentle lapping of water against reed boats created nature's own lullaby for those trying to sleep. The year is 2500 BCE, and the sun has just dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. The air carries the earthy scent of wet mud from the day's irrigation work, mixed with the sweet fragrance of lotus blossoms floating on the river's surface. Frogs begin their evening chorus from the papyrus marshes, a sound so constant that most people have learned to find it comforting rather than disruptive. In a modest mud brick house near the river, a farmer named Keti lies on his reed mat, staring up at the palm beam ceiling. His calloused hands rest behind his head as he listens to his wife Nefret grinding grain in the next room, the steady rhythm of stone against stone creating a hypnotic sound. But sleep won't come. The water level dropped again today. Keti murmurs to himself, watching shadows dance across the wall from the oil lamp's flickering flame. If the Nile doesn't rise properly this season, we'll lose half the barley crop. This was the ancient Egyptian farmer's version of checking bank accounts at midnight. The annual flood of the Nile determined everything: whether families would eat well or go hungry, whether they could pay their taxes to the pharaoh's collectors, whether their children would have enough food to grow strong. Keti had seen both feast and famine, and he knew the signs to watch for. Outside his window, he can hear the night sounds of his village. A donkey brays in the distance, probably objecting to its load of grain sacks. Dogs bark at something moving through the palm groves, perhaps a desert fox searching for scraps. The night air carries the calls of ibises settling into their roosts along the riverbank, their voices mixing with the splash of fish jumping in the dark water. Nefret enters their sleeping chamber, setting down the oil lamp carefully. The warm light illuminates her tired face, streaked with flour dust. Still awake? She asks softly, settling onto her own mat beside his. Thinking about the fields, Keti admits. Old Seneb says his grandfather remembered a year when the flood failed completely. Families had to eat grass and tree bark. Nefret reaches over and touches his arm. The river has never failed us completely. Even in bad years, we find ways to manage. Remember when we were young and your father taught you to dig the deeper channels? That saved half our crop when the flood was weak. Keti nods, but his mind continues racing. In his head, he's calculating grain stores, estimating how long their current supplies might last, wondering if he should trade some of their better pottery to secure extra seed for next season. These weren't idle worries. Life in ancient Egypt operated on thin margins, where a bad harvest could mean the difference between prosperity and starvation. The couple lies in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the Nile Valley. Somewhere in the darkness, a hippopotamus snorts and splashes in the river, a sound both familiar and slightly ominous. During the day, hippos were dangerous, territorial beasts that could destroy boats and attack unwary fishermen. But at night, their presence felt almost protective, a sign that the river ecosystem remained healthy and strong. A gentle breeze stirs the linen curtain hanging over their window, carrying the scent of jasmine from Nefret's small garden. She had planted the flowering vines not just for their beauty, but because their sweet fragrance helped mask less pleasant odors from the animal pens and compost heaps nearby. Do you remember what your mother used to say about sleepless nights? Nefret asks quietly. Katie smiles in the darkness. That worrying twice about tomorrow's troubles makes them twice as heavy. Wise woman. She lived through more flood seasons than we've seen, and she always found reasons to smile. As if summoned by their conversation, they hear footsteps on the path outside, accompanied by a man's voice singing softly. It's Amenhotep, the village baker, making his way to the communal ovens to begin the day's bread making. His routine starts in the darkest hours before dawn, when most people are still deep in sleep. There's a man who truly knows about sleepless nights, Keti observes. Let's follow Amenhotep to understand his particular relationship with nighttime hours. The baker moves through the village with practiced ease, his feet finding the smooth stones of the path, even in darkness. He carries a small oil lamp, but relies more on memory and familiarity than sight. The air is cool now, a blessed relief from the scorching heat that will return with sunrise. Amenhotep's day begins when others are ending theirs. While families settle into sleep, he's calculating how much bread the village will need, checking his supplies of emmer wheat and barley flour, making sure the yeast mixture has fermented properly. His concerns are immediate and practical, but no less consuming than the farmer's seasonal worries. At the bakery, a modest building with thick walls and large ovens built into the ground, Amenhotep begins his careful routine. The ovens must be heated gradually, fed with dried palm fronds and acacia wood to reach the proper temperature. Too hot, and the bread burns on the outside while remaining raw within. Too cool, and the loaves emerge dense and heavy, unsuitable for offering to the gods or selling to wealthy customers. Good morning, Thoth, he whispers to the ibis-headed god of wisdom, offering a small prayer as he lights the first fire. Bakers, like many craftsmen, had patron deities who watched over their work. Thoth's blessing was essential for the complex timing that bread making required. As the ovens warm, Amenhotep begins mixing dough, his hands working by feel in the dim light. The grain has been ground by village women like Nefret, pounded in stone mortars until it becomes fine flour. He adds water drawn fresh from the Nile, still cool from the night air, and carefully measured amounts of the precious yeast culture he's maintained for years. The physical work is meditative in its own way. Kneading dough requires rhythm and patience, qualities that can calm an anxious mind. But Amenhotep's thoughts often wander to concerns that keep him awake even after his long workday ends. Will the grain shipment arrive on time? Has he saved enough of the good flour for the temple offerings? What if the yeast culture fails and he has to start over? In ancient Egypt, bakers held important positions in society, but also faced significant responsibilities. Bread was currency, food, and religious offering all at once. The quality of a baker's work could determine his family's social standing and economic security. Poor bread could result in angry customers, lost business, or even accusations of cheating with inferior ingredients. As the night progresses, other early risers begin stirring in the village. Fishermen prepare their nets and boats for the dawn catch, when fish are most active in the cooler waters. The gentle sounds of their preparation drift through the still air, nets being untangled, oars being checked for cracks, boats being pushed into the shallow water along the riverbank. One of these fishermen, a weather-beaten man named Khnum, shares many of Amenhotep's concerns about timing and unpredictability. Fishing depends on reading subtle signs, understanding the behavior of different fish species, knowing where the water runs deep or shallow, recognizing which areas are safe from crocodiles and which should be avoided. Khnum often lies awake, considering these variables. Will the catfish be running near the southern bend tomorrow? Should I try the deeper pools by the temple or stay in the shallows where it's safer but the catch might be smaller? These decisions affect not just his daily income, but his family's survival. The Nile offered incredible bounty to those who understood its rhythms. Catfish, perch, mullet, and dozens of other species moved through different areas at different times, following food sources, water temperature, and seasonal patterns that experienced fishermen learned to predict. But the river was also dangerous, home to crocodiles, hippos, and sudden storms that could overwhelm small boats. As Calm lies on his mat, listening to his wife's steady breathing and the soft sounds of his children sleeping nearby, his mind reviews the day's observations. The water seemed cloudier than usual near the reed beds, which might indicate fish feeding actively below the surface, but he'd also noticed crocodile tracks on the muddy bank, fresher than he'd seen in weeks. The balance between risk and reward dominated the thoughts of working people in ancient Egypt. Every decision carried consequences that rippled through family and community life. A fisherman's choice of where to cast his nets, a farmer's decision about when to plant or harvest, a baker's judgment about oven temperature. All these seemingly small choices accumulated into the difference between thriving and merely surviving. Outside Konom's house, the night air fills with the sounds of insects beginning their daily transformation. Beetles emerge from hiding places to search for food, their movements rustling through dried palm fronds. Mosquitoes rise from stagnant pools, creating a high whine that makes people grateful for the smoke from dung fires that helps keep the pests at bay. The desert beyond the green strip of the Nile Valley lies silent and vast under the star-filled sky. Occasionally, the wind carries strange sounds from that emptiness, the call of a jackal pack or the shifting of sand dunes. These sounds remind the river dwellers of the harsh world that exists just beyond their irrigated fields, a landscape where different rules apply and different dangers wait. But for now, the Nile Valley remains a haven of relative comfort and security. The river's presence creates its own microclimate, moderating temperature extremes and supporting the lush vegetation that makes civilization possible. Palm trees rustle in the night breeze, their fronds creating a whispering sound that many find soothing. Date palms, in particular, were treasured not just for their fruit, but for their leaves, which were woven into baskets, mats, and roofing material. Let's move forward in time, leaving the ancient Nile behind, and traveling to medieval Europe, where different concerns kept people staring at thatched ceilings in the dark hours before dawn. The year is 1340 CE, and in a small village in what is now southern France, a blacksmith named Pierre tosses restlessly on his straw mattress. Outside his workshop, the wind howls through bare tree branches, creating sounds that seem almost human in their moaning intensity. Winter has settled over the countryside with particular harshness this year, and the cold seeps through every gap in the wooden walls, despite the banked coals still glowing in his forge. Pierre's concerns are both similar to and different from those that troubled Katie, the Egyptian farmer, over 3,000 years earlier. Like Katie, Pierre worries about providing for his family, about having enough resources to survive difficult times, about the unpredictable forces that could disrupt his livelihood. But Pierre's world operates under different rules, shaped by feudalism, Christianity, and the particular challenges of medieval European life. The Baron's warhorse threw a shoe yesterday, Pierre mutters to his sleeping wife, Marguerite. If I can't repair the damage to his hoof, he'll blame my workmanship. And if his mood turns sour, he might decide to increase our rent again. In medieval Europe, relationships between lords and peasants created a complex web of obligations and dependencies that could keep anyone awake at night. Pierre wasn't just a craftsman serving customers. He was a tenant bound to his lord by ties of feudal obligation. His family's security depended not just on the quality of his metalwork, but on maintaining the goodwill of powerful people who could change his circumstances with a word. The night sounds of medieval France differ markedly from those of ancient Egypt. Instead of hippos and ibises, Pierre hears the howl of wolves in the nearby forest, a sound that makes mothers pull their children closer and farmers worry about their livestock. Wolves posed a real threat to rural communities, capable of killing sheep, goats, and even attacking humans during particularly harsh winters when other prey became scarce. A barn owl calls from somewhere in the darkness, its voice eerily human-like as it hunts for mice and rats. These birds were welcomed by farmers and craftsmen alike, since they helped control rodent populations that could devastate grain stores. But their ghostly appearance and haunting calls also fed superstitions and fears that made nighttime feel more menacing. Marguerite stirs beside Pierre, pulling their shared woolen blanket higher against the cold. Their house consists of just 2 rooms, the workshop where Pierre works his forge and anvil, and the smaller chamber where the family sleeps and takes meals. The walls are made of timber and clay, chinked with mud and straw to keep out drafts. But winter wind finds every weakness. "Can't sleep again?" Marguerite asks softly. Thinking about spring planting, Pierre admits, "If we're going to expand the vegetable garden, I need to clear more of the back plot. But that means borrowing Father Benedict's ox, and I still owe him work on the church's door hinges." Medieval life operated on a complex system of mutual obligations and reciprocal favors. Pierre might shoe the miller's horse in exchange for ground grain, repair the baker's oven tools for fresh bread. The couple lies quietly, listening to sounds that speak of their community's nighttime activities. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, probably responding to some nocturnal visitor, a fox investigating chicken coops, or a stray pig wandering loose. The bark triggers responses from other dogs throughout the village, creating a brief chorus that gradually fades back to silence. From the direction of the monastery, they can hear the faint sound of bells calling monks to midnight prayers. The religious communities that dotted medieval Europe operated on schedules that divided night and day into periods of worship, work, and rest. For lay people like Pierre and Marguerite, these distant bells provided a comforting reminder that someone remained awake and vigilant, praying for the community's welfare while others slept. Pierre's work as a blacksmith placed him in a unique position within medieval society. He possessed specialized knowledge and skills that made him valuable to everyone, from peasant farmers to noble warriors. But this status also brought pressure and responsibility. When plows broke during crucial planting times, when horses threw shoes on important journeys, when weapons needed repair before battles, people turned to Pierre with urgent demands and high expectations. "Remember old Henri telling stories about his grandfather's time?" Marguerite asks. "How they survived the terrible winter when wolves came right into the village square." Pierre nods, recalling the tales that older villagers shared around winter fires. Medieval communities preserved their history through oral tradition, passing down accounts of exceptional seasons, memorable events, and hard-won lessons about survival. These stories served both as entertainment and as practical guidance for facing similar challenges. The winter Unra's grandfather had described sounded almost mythical in its severity. Wolves, driven by starvation, had grown bold enough to hunt in populated areas. Rivers froze so solid that loaded carts could cross them safely. People burned furniture and even structural timbers from their houses to stay warm, gambling that they could replace the wood before their homes collapsed. Such extreme conditions tested every aspect of medieval survival strategies. Food preservation techniques that worked in normal years might prove inadequate. Fuel supplies carefully calculated for typical winters could run dangerously low. Social bonds that held communities together under ordinary stress might fracture when resources became truly scarce. But Pierre's immediate concerns focus on more mundane challenges. His iron stock runs lower than he'd like, and the charcoal burners' prices have increased again. The Baron's steward mentioned that new regulations might restrict which craftsmen could work iron, favoring guild members from larger towns over village smiths like Pierre. These bureaucratic worries reflect the changing nature of medieval society in the 14th century. Traditional arrangements between lords and peasants were becoming more complex as commerce expanded and central government strengthened. A village blacksmith might find his livelihood threatened not by local failures, but by distant political decisions. As the night progresses, Pierre's thoughts turn to his children sleeping in the corner of the room. His eldest son, Jean, shows promise with metalwork and might continue the family trade. But opportunities for learning advanced techniques exist mainly in larger towns, where established masters take on apprentices. Sending Jean away would provide better training, but separate the family and require resources. Pierre isn't sure he can gather. His daughter, Marie, displays intelligence and skill that might suit her for a position in a wealthy household, perhaps as a lady's maid or seamstress. Such work would provide security and social advancement, but also remove her from family protection and subject her to the whims of employers who might treat servants well or poorly, depending on their characters. These parental calculations occupy the minds of working people across cultures and centuries. How do you prepare children for futures you can't fully predict? What risks are worth taking to improve their prospects? How do you balance family unity against individual opportunity? The wind outside intensifies, rattling the wooden shutters and sending cold drafts through gaps around the windows. Pierre rises quietly and adds another piece of charcoal to the small brazier that provides their chamber's only heat. The glow illuminates religious images painted on the wall, simple depictions of saints and biblical scenes that provide spiritual comfort during long, anxious nights. Medieval Christianity offered explanations and consolations for the uncertainties that kept people awake. Suffering was a test of faith, hardship was penance for sin, and eventual reward waited for those who endured with patience and prayer. But these spiritual frameworks didn't eliminate practical worries. They simply provided context for understanding them. Let's follow the night sounds outside Pierre's house and visit another sleepless resident of this medieval village. Down the lane, past the baker's shop and the well where villagers gather each morning to draw water and exchange news, lives a widow named Agnes, who supports herself and her elderly mother by weaving cloth and tending a small flock of sheep. Agnes faces challenges that would be familiar to working women across many historical periods. She must generate income through skilled labor, while also managing household responsibilities, caring for dependents, and maintaining her social reputation in a community where a woman's standing depends heavily on others' opinions of her character and behavior. Tonight, Agnes lies awake, worrying about her largest ewe, who seems to be having difficulty with pregnancy. If the birth goes poorly, Agnes could lose both mother and lamb, representing a significant portion of her small flock's value. She possesses some veterinary knowledge, passed down from her mother and other village women, but complicated births sometimes require expertise beyond what she can provide. Should I ask Robert the shepherd for help? She wonders. Robert knows more about sheep than anyone in the area, but asking for his assistance might create obligations Agnes can't easily repay. In medieval communities, accepting help usually meant owing favors, and a widow's ability to reciprocate was limited by her social position and resources. The sheep pen sits just outside Agnes's window, and she can hear her animals moving restlessly in their shelter. Sheep often sense when one of their number is in distress, becoming agitated and vocal in ways that can keep entire neighborhoods awake. But these same animals provide Agnes with wool for spinning, milk for cheese making, and eventually meat for special occasions or emergency food supplies. Agnes's mother, Isabel, sleeps fitfully in the bed they share, occasionally murmuring prayers or fragments of old songs. At 70 years old, Isabel has survived plagues, famines, wars, and personal losses that would break weaker spirits. Her presence provides Agnes with both comfort and additional responsibility, as caring for elderly parents was considered both moral obligation and practical necessity in medieval society. The night air carries the scent of smoke from multiple chimneys, as families throughout the village maintain fires for warmth and cooking. Different types of fuel create distinctive odors. Oak and beech wood burn with sweet fragrances, while dried dung and straw produce earthier smells. Experienced villagers can identify their neighbors' economic circumstances by the smoke from their chimneys. A cat yowls somewhere in the darkness, probably defending territory or announcing romantic intentions. Cats were valued in medieval communities for their ability to control mice and rats, but they also inspired superstition and unease. Their nocturnal habits and predatory nature made them symbols of mystery and potential danger, especially for people already anxious about supernatural threats. Agnes rises quietly and moves to her spinning wheel, thinking that productive work might calm her worried mind. The familiar motions of spinning wool into thread provide both meditation and practical benefit, turning raw materials into products she can sell or trade. In the dim light from her small oil lamp, she begins the rhythmic process that countless women before her have used to transform anxiety into useful activity. The wool slides through her fingers with practiced ease, each strand joining others to create strong, even thread. This work requires attention, but not intense concentration, allowing her mind to process worries while her hands remain busy. Spinning was one of the fundamental technologies that made medieval life possible, converting animal fleece into the raw material for clothing, blankets, and other textiles essential for survival. As Agnes works, she considers the broader challenges facing her community. Rumors from traveling merchants suggest that plague has appeared in cities to the south, the same disease that devastated Europe just a few years earlier. If sickness reaches their village, people like Agnes, who care for elderly relatives and depend on close community networks, would face terrible choices between personal safety and moral obligation. These fears weren't unfounded paranoia, but realistic assessment of genuine threats. The Black Death and other epidemic diseases could eliminate entire communities within weeks, leaving survivors to cope with social and economic collapse. Medieval people lived with the knowledge that catastrophe could arrive without warning, making every season of health and prosperity feel precious and fragile. But Agnes also finds reasons for optimism in her nighttime thoughts. Her spinning has improved significantly over the past year, allowing her to produce thread of higher quality that commands better prices. The village priest has praised her care for her mother, enhancing her reputation for virtue and reliability. Young Marie, the blacksmith's daughter, has begun learning spinning techniques from Agnes, providing both income and the satisfaction of passing on valuable skills. These small victories and positive developments help balance the fears and uncertainties that dominate anxious thoughts. Medieval people like their counterparts in other eras, learn to find hope and strength in modest achievements and everyday kindnesses. The night progresses toward dawn, and Agnes begins to hear stirring from houses throughout the village. Roosters announce the approaching sunrise with their traditional calls, triggering responses from other birds, awakening to begin daily searches for food. The baker's chimney begins producing fresh smoke as he starts the day's bread making, a process that will fill the village with appetizing aromas within a few hours. Let's travel forward again, leaving medieval Europe behind and visiting 18th century colonial America, where different concerns disrupted the sleep of people building new lives in unfamiliar landscapes. The year is 1750, and in a farmhouse carved from the wilderness of what will someday become Pennsylvania, a farmer named Samuel lies awake listening to sounds that would terrify European visitors, but have become familiar parts of his nightly routine. Owls call from the vast forest that surrounds his cleared fields, their voices ranging from the deep hoots of great horned owls to the eerie screams of barn owls hunting small prey. Samuel's farm represents 5 years of back-breaking labor, clearing trees, pulling stumps, building fences, and gradually expanding the area of cultivated land. Unlike farmers in established communities, Samuel must serve as his own carpenter, veterinarian, blacksmith, and general problem solver. When equipment breaks or animals fall sick, help might be days away, assuming it's available at all. "The corn looks good this year," Samuel murmurs to his wife Rebecca, who lies beside him under quilts she made from fabric they spun themselves. "But those raccoons are getting bolder every night. If they get into the patch before harvest, we could lose a quarter of the crop." Colonial farmers dealt with wildlife challenges that would seem exotic to their European ancestors. Raccoons, opossums, deer, and bears all viewed human crops as convenient food sources, requiring constant vigilance and creative deterrent strategies. Samuel has tried everything from scarecrows to noisemakers to sleeping in the fields with a musket, but clever animals often found ways around his defenses. The night sounds of colonial America included many voices unfamiliar to European ears. Whippoorwills call repeatedly from the forest edge, their distinctive cry giving them their name. Bullfrogs boom from the pond, Samuel created by damming a small stream, their deep voices mixing with the higher notes of tree frogs and spring peepers. Somewhere in the distance, a pack of wolves howls, a sound that still makes Rebecca pull the blankets closer despite years of frontier living. But Samuel's immediate worries focus on more prosaic challenges. The wheat harvest is approaching, and he needs to organize a work party to help bring in the crop before weather can damage it. In frontier communities, neighbors supported each other during peak work periods, but this cooperation required careful social management and reciprocal obligations. "Did you remember to speak with Thomas about borrowing his scythe?" Rebecca asks quietly. He said yes, but wants help clearing that new field behind his barn. "That's 3 days' work at least, and I'm not sure when I can spare the time." Colonial life operated on tight schedules dictated by seasons and weather. Planting, cultivating, and harvesting had to occur within narrow windows of opportunity, while other essential tasks, building repairs, food preservation, firewood gathering, competed for the same limited time. Poor planning or unexpected delays could create cascading problems that affected the entire year's prospects. Their log house consists of 2 rooms, plus a loft where their children sleep. The walls are chinked with mud and moss to keep out wind and insects, but gaps still admit cold air during winter and allow smoke to escape during summer cooking. A large stone fireplace provides heat, light, and cooking facilities, but requires constant attention to maintain proper fires for different purposes. Rebecca manages a complex household economy that includes not just cooking and cleaning, but also textile production, food preservation, herb gardening, poultry raising, and basic medical care for the family. She spins flax and wool into thread, weaves cloth for clothing and household use, makes soap from animal fat and wood ash, and preserves meat, vegetables, and fruits for winter consumption. The apple trees are heavy with fruit this year, Rebecca observes. I'll need to start drying apples soon, and we should think about trading some to the miller for flour. Colonial women often managed complex barter networks that allowed families to obtain goods they couldn't produce themselves. Rebecca might trade preserved apples for ground grain, exchange eggs for metal tools, or swap homespun cloth for imported items like tea or sugar. These transactions required careful calculation of relative values and timing to ensure fair exchanges. Samuel's concerns extend beyond his immediate farm to the broader challenges of frontier life. Indian raids, while less common than in earlier decades, still posed potential threats. Wild animals occasionally attacked livestock, or even humans. Accidents and injuries could prove catastrophic when medical help was distant or unavailable. But perhaps the most persistent worry was isolation itself. The nearest neighbors lived several miles away, connected by rough trails that became impassable during winter storms or spring mud seasons. If serious problems arose, Samuel and Rebecca might have to cope alone for weeks or months before help could arrive. I keep thinking about the Henderson family, Samuel admits. When their father broke his leg, they nearly lost everything trying to manage the farm without him. Frontier families lived constantly aware that individual misfortune could quickly become community tragedy. A breadwinner's injury or death, a house fire, a failed crop, any of these events could force families to abandon homes and land they'd spent years developing. Survival depended not just on hard work and planning, but on luck and the willingness of neighbors to provide assistance during emergencies. The sounds outside their house reflect the wild abundance of colonial American ecosystems. Somewhere in the forest, a great horned owl calls, answered by its mate from a different direction. These powerful predators help control populations of small mammals that might otherwise overrun human settlements, but their calls also remind colonists of the vast wilderness that surrounds their small cleared spaces. A screech owl adds its eerie voice to the nocturnal chorus, a sound that made even experienced frontiersmen pause and listen. These smaller owls nested in tree cavities and helped control insect populations, but their voices seemed almost supernatural in their intensity and emotion. From the direction of the pond, beavers slapped their tails against the water, warning of some perceived threat or announcing territorial claims. Beavers were valued for their fur and appreciated for their dam-building activities that created wetlands, but they also occasionally flooded areas that colonists wanted to use for agriculture. Samuel rises quietly and moves to the window, peering out at his moonlit fields. The corn stands tall and straight, promising a good harvest if weather and pests cooperate. Beyond the cultivated area, the forest begins, a wall of darkness that extends for hundreds of miles in every direction. Somewhere in that vastness, other pioneers like Samuel are creating their own small islands of civilization, connected to each other by shared challenges and mutual dependence. Let's visit one of those distant neighbors, a family named Morrison, who operate a small grist mill about 10 miles from Samuel's farm. The mill sits beside a fast-flowing creek that provides power for grinding grain, but also creates its own set of worries for people trying to sleep. David Morrison lies in his bed above the mill, listening to the constant sound of water flowing over the dam and through the mill race. During normal seasons, this sound provides a soothing backdrop that helps mask other nighttime noises. But recently, heavy rains have swollen the creek to dangerous levels, and David worries about flood damage to his equipment. "The water's running higher than I've seen it in years," David tells his wife Martha. "If it gets much worse, I might have to shut down the wheel to prevent damage." Colonial mills served essential functions for farming communities, converting grain into flour and meal that families needed for daily bread and other foods. But mills also represented significant investments in equipment and infrastructure that could be destroyed by floods, fires, or mechanical failures. Mill owners like David carried responsibility for serving their communities while protecting their own economic survival. Martha shares her own concerns about their situation. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that her husband is thinking about building a mill closer to the main settlement. "If that happens, we could lose half our customers." Competition between mills could devastate established operations, especially in sparsely populated areas where customer bases were limited. David's mill succeeded partly because of its location and partly because of his reputation for honest dealing and quality work. But new mills with better locations or more modern equipment could quickly change the competitive landscape. The night sounds around the mill include many voices that Samuel and Rebecca would recognize from their farm. Owls call from the forest, frogs sing from wetlands created by the mill pond, and insects create a constant background hum that rises and falls with temperature and humidity changes. But the mill also attracts its own particular wildlife. Mice and rats are drawn to spilled grain, bringing cats and owls that hunt them. Bats roost in the mill building's rafters, emerging at dusk to feed on flying insects. Their high-pitched calls and erratic flight patterns add to the complex soundscape that surrounds the Morrison family's home. David's work requires different skills than Samuel's farming, but faces similar uncertainties. Weather affects mill operations through both water levels and the condition of grain delivered for processing. Too little rain, and the creek lacks power to turn the wheel efficiently. Too much rain, and flooding threatens equipment and buildings. Mechanical problems pose constant challenges for colonial mill operators. The heavy wooden gears and stone grinding wheels require regular maintenance and occasional replacement. When key components fail, repairs might require specialized knowledge or materials that aren't readily available on the frontier. "I should probably replace the main drive gear next spring," David muses. "The teeth are wearing down, and I'm afraid it might strip completely if I wait much longer." Such maintenance decisions involve careful timing and resource management. Replacing major mill components requires shutting down operations during peak grinding seasons, losing income while investing in expensive repairs. But delaying maintenance too long risks catastrophic failures that could put the mill out of business permanently. Martha manages household responsibilities similar to Rebecca's, but adapted to their particular circumstances. The mill's location beside the creek provides easy access to water for cooking and cleaning, but also creates challenges with humidity and occasional flooding. She grows vegetables in areas protected from the creek's seasonal variations and raises poultry that help control insects attracted to spilled grain. The mill building itself serves multiple functions beyond grain processing. The main floor houses the grinding stones and water wheel mechanisms, while upper floors provide storage for grain and flour. The Morrison family's living quarters occupy part of the building, allowing David to monitor operations and respond quickly to problems. This arrangement means that the sounds of mill operation become part of daily and nightly life. The rhythmic rumble of grinding stones, the splash of water over the wheel, the creak of wooden gears and shafts, all these noises fade into background familiarity for people who live with them constantly. But David's trained ear picks up subtle changes that might indicate developing problems. A slight irregularity in the wheel's rotation could signal bearing wear. Unusual vibrations might suggest loose bolts or shifting stones. Changes in the water's sound could indicate debris blocking the race or shifting in the dam structure. "Do you hear that squeaking from the main bearing?" David asks Martha. She listens carefully to the mill's mechanical symphony. It does sound different than usual, more pronounced. These conversations reflect the intimate relationship between colonial craftsmen and their equipment. Success depended on understanding every sound, vibration, and performance characteristic of complex mechanical systems. Experience taught operators to detect problems early, before minor issues became major failures. The creek outside continues its endless conversation with rocks and logs, a sound that connects the Morrison Mill to the vast network of waterways flowing through colonial America. This creek joins a larger stream, which flows into a river, which eventually reaches the sea. Along this network, other mills, farms, and settlements create their own small modifications to the natural landscape. But the wilderness remains dominant, vast and largely unexplored, surrounding human settlements like islands in an ocean of forest. The night sounds that reach the mill include voices from deep woods where few humans have ever traveled. Wolves, bears, wildcats, and other large predators still roam freely through territories their ancestors controlled for thousands of years. As dawn approaches, both the Morrison and Samuel families begin stirring in preparation for another day of the demanding work that frontier life requires. But first, let's travel forward once more to visit people whose nighttime worries would sound surprisingly familiar to modern ears. The year is 1890, and in a rapidly growing industrial city that will someday be called Detroit, a factory worker named Patrick O'Brien lies awake in his small apartment, listening to sounds that previous generations never imagined. Steam whistles blow from factories throughout the city, announcing shift changes that occur around the clock. The clatter of horse-drawn wagons on cobblestone streets mixes with the newer sounds of early automobiles, their engines coughing and sputtering as drivers navigate poorly lit roads. Patrick works at a foundry that produces metal parts for the agricultural equipment and industrial machinery driving America's economic expansion. His job requires him to wake before dawn and work until sunset, feeding molten iron into molds, operating heavy machinery, and enduring heat and noise that would overwhelm farmers like Samuel or craftsmen like Pierre, the medieval blacksmith. "Another 12-hour day tomorrow," Patrick mutters to his wife Bridget, who lies beside him, trying to ignore the sounds of their upstairs neighbors, arguing about money. Murphy says they're talking about extending shifts to 14 hours if the big order comes through. Industrial work created new types of sleep disruption that earlier generations never experienced. Factory schedules ignored natural rhythms of sunrise and sunset, demanding that workers adapt their bodies to mechanical time, controlled by supervisors and production quotas. The physical exhaustion of industrial labor should have made sleep easy, but anxiety about job security, workplace accidents, and family finances often kept workers staring at tenement ceilings deep into the night. Bridget shares concerns that would be familiar to working women across many historical periods, but with distinctly modern complications. She takes in laundry to supplement Patrick's wages, spending long days washing, ironing, and mending clothes for families wealthy enough to pay for such services. The work is physically demanding and exposes her to chemicals and steam that affect her health, but provides essential income for their growing family. Mrs. Kowalski mentioned that the textile mill is hiring women for the day shift. Bridget says quietly, "The pay is better than laundry work, but I've heard stories about the conditions there." Industrial employment offered women new opportunities to earn wages, but also exposed them to dangers and exploitation that domestic work avoided. Factory jobs paid better than traditional women's work, like sewing or laundry, but required long hours in poorly ventilated buildings with dangerous machinery and harsh supervisors. Their apartment consists of 3 small rooms on the second floor of a building that houses 4 families. The walls are thin enough that conversations, arguments, and crying children from neighboring units provide a constant soundtrack to daily life. Privacy becomes a precious commodity when families live in such close quarters, and personal problems quickly become community knowledge. The sounds of late 19th century urban life fill the night outside their window. Saloons stay open late, their patrons spilling onto sidewalks with loud conversations and occasional fights. Police patrol on foot, their heavy boots echoing off brick buildings as they check doors and investigate disturbances. Street vendors call out in multiple languages, offering food, newspapers, and small goods to workers heading home from late shifts. Patrick's concerns reflect the particular anxieties of industrial workers during America's rapid economic transformation. Factory employment provided steady wages and opportunities for advancement, but also exposed workers to economic forces beyond their control. Business cycles, technological changes, and management decisions could eliminate jobs quickly, leaving families with no income and few alternatives. "Did you hear about the foundry in Chicago?" Patrick asks. "They laid off 200 men last week when that big contract fell through." News of industrial layoffs, workplace accidents, and economic downturns traveled quickly through working class communities, creating collective anxiety about employment security. Workers knew that their individual efforts and loyalty offered little protection against larger economic forces that could destroy livelihoods without warning. But Patrick also recognizes opportunities that previous generations couldn't imagine. His children can attend public schools that provide education beyond basic literacy. Labor unions are organizing to improve working conditions and wages. New technologies create jobs that didn't exist when his parents were young. "Young Michael is doing well with his arithmetic," Patrick observes with pride. "The teacher says he might be smart enough for high school, maybe even business college." Education represented hope for working class families in industrial America. Children who learned advanced skills might escape the physical demands and economic uncertainty of factory work, moving into clerical positions, skilled trades, or even professions that provided better pay and social status. Bridget's thoughts turn to her own aspirations and frustrations. She possesses intelligence and organizational skills that could serve her well in business or community leadership, but social conventions and economic necessity limit her options to domestic work and child rearing. The women's rights movement offers inspiration, but practical change seems slow and distant. "Sometimes I wonder what life would be like if women could vote," Bridget muses. "Maybe we'd have better schools, cleaner streets, laws that protect workers instead of just business owners." These conversations reflect the social and political awakening occurring in late 19th century America. Working people began questioning traditional authorities and demanding greater voice in decisions that affected their lives. Labor unions, political reform movements, and social justice campaigns challenged established power structures and created new possibilities for ordinary citizens. The night air carries industrial odors that earlier generations never experienced. Coal smoke from factories and locomotives creates acrid smells that irritate throats and eyes. Chemical processes release vapors with unfamiliar scents that might be harmless or dangerous. Nobody knows for certain. The sheer concentration of people and industrial activity produces waste disposal challenges that overwhelm existing sanitation systems. But the city also offers cultural opportunities that rural areas can't match. Music halls present performances by traveling entertainers. Libraries provide books and newspapers from around the world. Immigrant communities share foods, traditions, and stories from dozens of different countries. Patrick and Bridget can hear accordion music drifting from the Polish family's apartment downstairs, mixing with the sound of children playing games in languages their parents brought from Europe. This diversity creates both richness and tension as different groups compete for jobs and housing while also learning from each other's experiences. Let's visit another resident of this rapidly changing city, a skilled machinist named James Sullivan, who represents the emerging class of technical workers that industrial development created. James operates precision equipment that produces interchangeable parts for mechanical devices, work that requires mathematical knowledge, steady hands, and the ability to read complex technical drawings. James earns significantly more than Patrick the foundry worker, but faces different types of anxiety about his future prospects. Technological change that creates opportunities for skilled workers also threatens to make their knowledge obsolete. New machines might eliminate the need for human precision, or younger workers with formal technical training might replace experienced craftsmen who learned through apprenticeship. They're bringing in one of those new automatic lathes next month, James tells his wife, Catherine, as they lie in their more comfortable apartment in a better neighborhood. The supervisor says it can do the work of 3 men and do it more accurately. Industrial innovation created constant pressure for workers to adapt their skills or risk unemployment. James spent years learning to operate existing machinery with expert precision, but technological progress could render that expertise worthless within months. Staying employed required continuous learning and adaptation that many workers found exhausting and stressful. Catherine manages a household that reflects their family's improved economic circumstances, but also faces distinctly modern challenges. She can afford to purchase some manufactured goods rather than making everything herself, but must navigate advertising claims and product quality issues that didn't affect earlier generations who produced their own necessities. The newspaper advertisements promise so many wonderful things, Catherine observes. But how do you know which products actually work as claimed? Mrs. Patterson bought that new washing machine, and it broke within a month. Consumer culture was emerging in late 19th century America, offering unprecedented choices, but also creating new forms of anxiety and decision-making complexity. Families with rising incomes could purchase labor-saving devices, fashionable clothing, and entertainment options, but lacked established ways to evaluate quality and value. The night sounds around James and Catherine's neighborhood differ from those in Patrick and Bridget's more crowded area. Tree-lined streets create rustling sounds as wind moves through leaves. Horse-drawn carriages move more quietly on better-maintained roads. The pace of life seems slightly more relaxed, though industrial sounds still dominate the auditory landscape. But James's skilled position also brings professional responsibilities that can disrupt sleep. When important machinery breaks down, he might be called to the factory at any hour to make emergency repairs. His expertise with precision equipment makes him valuable, but also creates expectations for availability that exceed normal working hours. The night foreman sent word that the main assembly line stopped again. Catherine mentions, "They'll probably need you to come in early tomorrow to fix whatever's wrong." These emergency calls represent both opportunity and burden for skilled workers. Extra pay for overtime and emergency work could significantly improve family finances, but unpredictable schedules made it difficult to plan family activities or maintain regular sleep patterns. James's concerns about technological change reflect broader social anxieties about the pace of progress in industrial America. Cities grew so rapidly that infrastructure couldn't keep pace with population increases. New technologies appeared faster than society could understand their implications. Traditional social relationships and community structures struggled to adapt to urban industrial conditions. Sometimes I wonder if all this progress is actually making life better, James reflects. My grandfather was a farmer, and he knew exactly what his work meant and where his food came from. Now I make parts for machines that go to other factories to make different machines, and I'm not even sure what the final products are used for. This sense of disconnection from meaningful work troubled many people during the Industrial Transformation. Traditional craftsmen created complete products they could take pride in, while industrial workers often performed repetitive tasks on components they never saw assembled into finished goods. The division of labor that made mass production possible also fragmented the sense of accomplishment that work had previously provided. But both James and Patrick recognize that industrial employment, despite its challenges, offers their families opportunities for advancement that agricultural life rarely provided. Their children can attend better schools, access medical care, and choose from career options that didn't exist in rural communities. As the night progresses, the sounds of the industrial city gradually shift toward morning rhythms. Factory whistles announce the change from night to day. Shifts. Milkmen begin their rounds, their wagons clattering over cobblestones as they deliver fresh dairy products to households throughout the city. Newspaper boys call out headlines, their voices joining the growing chorus of urban awakening. Let's take one final journey through time, visiting the early 20th century, to see how the concerns that kept people awake continued evolving with changing technology and social conditions. The year is 1925, and in a suburban house outside Chicago, an insurance salesman named Robert Hayes lies awake, listening to sounds that would amaze earlier generations. Radio broadcasts from distant cities fill the night air, bringing music, news, and entertainment into homes across America. The occasional automobile passes on the paved street outside, its engine running smoothly and quietly compared to the early motor cars that Patrick and Bridget heard in 1890. Robert's work represents the emerging service economy that was beginning to complement America's industrial base. Instead of making products with his hands, Robert sells intangible services that help families protect themselves against financial losses. His success depends on personal relationships, communication skills, and understanding of complex financial products, rather than physical strength or technical expertise. The Hendersons are thinking about canceling their life insurance policy, Robert tells his wife Helen, as they settle into their comfortable bed with its store-bought mattress and factory-made sheets. They say the premiums are too high, but they don't understand what could happen to Margaret and the children if something happens to Bill. The 1920s economy created new types of professional anxiety focused on customer relationships and market conditions rather than physical production. Robert's income depended on his ability to convince people to purchase services they hoped never to use, requiring psychological insight and sales skills that differed markedly from traditional craftsmanship. Helen faces her own distinctly modern concerns as a middle-class housewife in the 1920s. Labor-saving devices like electric washing machines and vacuum cleaners have reduced the physical demands of housework, but social expectations for cleanliness and home decoration have increased correspondingly. She spends considerable time and energy maintaining standards of domestic perfection that earlier generations would have found impossible to achieve. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that new vacuum cleaner advertised in the ladies' magazine. Helen says, "It's supposed to clean carpets better than anything available before, but it costs more than Robert makes in 2 weeks." Consumer culture had matured significantly by the 1920s, offering middle-class families unprecedented choices in home furnishings, appliances, and entertainment options. But these choices also created pressure to keep up with neighbors' purchases and social expectations that required careful budget management and priority setting. The night sounds of 1920s suburbia reflect America's technological advancement and growing prosperity. Electric lights eliminate much of the darkness that dominated earlier periods, though many families still turn off most illumination to save money. Radio broadcasts provide background entertainment that can help mask anxious thoughts, though some people find the constant stream of information stimulating rather than soothing. Robert's professional concerns include many issues that would be familiar to modern workers. Economic uncertainty affects insurance sales as families reduce spending on non-essential services during difficult times. Competition from other salesmen and insurance companies requires constant attention to customer service and product knowledge. Changes in regulations and industry practices demand continuous learning and adaptation. The company is introducing a new type of policy that combines life insurance with investment features, Robert explains to Helen. I need to learn how it works and figure out how to explain it to customers. But the training materials are complicated, and the regional manager expects us to start selling it immediately. Professional development became increasingly important for white-collar workers in the 1920s, as specialized knowledge and technical skills determined career advancement. Unlike craftsmen who learned their trades through apprenticeship, professional workers needed to stay current with rapidly changing information and techniques throughout their careers. Helen's nighttime thoughts often focus on their children's futures and the social changes affecting family life. Their daughter Dorothy shows academic ability that could qualify her for college, an opportunity that few women of previous generations could consider. But higher education for women remained controversial, and Helen worries about balancing encouragement for her daughter's intellectual development with preparation for traditional roles as wife and mother. Dorothy's teacher says she has real talent for mathematics, Helen observes, but I wonder if it's wise to encourage her too much in that direction. What kind of work could a woman do with advanced mathematical training? These conversations reflect the social tensions of the 1920s, as traditional gender roles began changing in response to women's increasing education and workforce participation. Families struggled to balance new opportunities with established expectations and practical limitations. The Hayes family's house represents the suburban dream that was becoming accessible to middle-class Americans in the 1920s. Electric lighting, indoor plumbing, central heating, and modern appliances provide comfort and convenience that would seem luxurious to earlier generations. But maintaining this lifestyle requires steady income and careful financial management that create their own forms of stress. Robert's insurance work involves helping other families plan for financial security, but he sometimes worries about his own family's economic vulnerability. The stock market's rapid rise creates opportunities for investment gains, but also generates concerns about market stability and the sustainability of current prosperity. Everyone seems to be making money in the stock market, Robert muses, but I remember my father talking about previous booms that ended badly. I wonder if we should be more cautious about investing our savings. These concerns proved prophetic, as the stock market crash of 1929 would soon demonstrate the risks of speculative investment and economic overconfidence. But in 1925, such warnings seemed overly pessimistic to people experiencing unprecedented prosperity and technological progress. The night air carries sounds that reflect America's transformation into a modern, industrialized society. Electric streetcars run on regular schedules, their bells clanging as operators navigate through traffic. Movie theaters stay open late, their audiences emerging with conversations about the latest films featuring stars like Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford. Dance halls and speakeasies provide entertainment that would shock earlier generations, but seem normal to young people in the 1920s. But underneath the optimism and prosperity of the 1920s, many of the same fundamental concerns that troubled earlier generations continued to affect people's sleep. Parents worried about their children's futures, workers feared economic insecurity, families struggled to balance individual desires with collective needs, and everyone faced uncertainty about forces beyond their control. As our journey through time comes to an end, we can see how the specific details of sleepless nights have changed dramatically across different eras, while the underlying human concerns remain remarkably consistent. Keti the Egyptian farmer worried about flood levels affecting his crops. Pierre the medieval blacksmith concerned himself with feudal obligations and seasonal work cycles. Samuel the colonial farmer faced wilderness dangers and isolation. Patrick the industrial worker dealt with mechanized labor and urban crowding, and Robert the 1920s salesman navigated consumer culture and professional competition. Yet all these people shared common experiences of lying awake at night, processing anxieties about providing for their families, maintaining their social positions, adapting to changing circumstances, and preparing for uncertain futures. The tools and technologies surrounding their lives evolved dramatically, but the fundamental human need for security, purpose, and connection remained constant. The sounds that filled their nighttime hours also show both change and continuity. Ancient Egyptians heard hippos splashing in the Nile. Medieval Europeans listened to wolves howling in nearby forests. Colonial Americans were serenaded by unfamiliar birds and wild animals. Industrial workers endured the constant noise of machinery and urban crowding, and 1920s suburbanites experienced the new soundscape of electric appliances and radio broadcasts. But in every era, people also heard the gentle sounds of their loved ones breathing beside them, the subtle noises of their communities settling into rest, and the natural rhythms of weather and seasons that connected them to the larger cycles of life on Earth. Perhaps the most comforting lesson from our journey is that sleepless nights have always been part of the human experience. Every generation has faced challenges that seemed overwhelming, uncertainties that appeared unprecedented, and changes that felt too rapid to comprehend. Yet each generation also found ways to adapt, to support each other through difficulties, and to create meaning and satisfaction despite imperfect circumstances. The next time you find yourself staring at the ceiling, in the dark hours before dawn, remember that you're participating in a tradition as old as human consciousness itself. Somewhere across time, Keti is calculating grain stores. Pierre is worrying about feudal obligations. Samuel is listening for signs of danger from the forest. Patrick is concerned about factory layoffs, and Robert is planning tomorrow's sales calls. You're not alone in your nighttime thoughts. You're part of an unbroken chain of human experience that connects you to countless generations of people who have faced their own versions of uncertainty and found ways to continue building meaningful lives despite imperfect knowledge of what tomorrow might bring. The night sounds that surround you, whether they're the hum of air conditioning, the distant sound of traffic, or the gentle breathing of family members nearby, are part of the same eternal symphony that has accompanied human rest and reflection since our species first began contemplating the mysteries of existence. Sleep well, knowing that your concerns, hopes, and dreams connect you to the great human story that continues unfolding through each passing night and awakening day.